Media Education Foundation and UMass professor, my former professor. Thanks for coming down.
Sure.
You'll be doing a rescreening of 2004's Hijacking Catastrophe at Smith College on September 11th at Wright Hall at 2 p.m. At 4 p.m., you'll be doing War Made Easy. You'll be there to take questions for both?
Actually, I will be there, and also Vijay Prashad, who's from Trinity College, will be there as well to take questions and answer anything that comes up.
We've been looking at a lot of different angles now, 10 years after 9/11. And way back, even when I had you as a professor, you were already talking about the use of 9/11 to justify, in many cases incorrectly, military action, domestic spying, Patriot Act, etc. And now that we've had a little bit more time, now that there's 10 years between 9/11 and where we are today, is that still going on to the same extent? Has it increased? Is it less of a concern now that Barack Obama, a supposedly progressive candidate, is president? Has it changed at all?
Well, just look where we are. We're still in Iraq and we're still in Afghanistan. I mean, we are in a permanent war economy. America will always be at war. Sometimes it will be made easier by events that are going on, but remember, the permanent war economy demands wars. And in that sense, 9/11 was a gift from heaven for the military-industrial complex, because they didn't even have to try to figure out how to increase military budgets. I mean, they were, if you remember, the neoconservatives were talking about how do we get the military budget up, and they thought only something really drastic would do it. 2 years later, they couldn't have dreamt in their dream. They couldn't have dreamt how large the military budget will become and how it's kept increasing since then. You asked about Obama. You look at Obama's military budget, it's actually bigger than the military budget than in the past. I mean, this is irrespective of who's in charge. This is irrespective of Obama. There's a lot of hopes for Obama, but you have to remember, you don't become president of the United States by being a radical. The job of the president of the United States is to manage the empire. And that is Barack Obama's job.
There's a study I vividly remember looking at, I think in 2004, from PIPA, which pointed out how likely people were to support going into Iraq based on three particular misconceptions. One of those three misconceptions was that 9/11 was connected to Iraq, something that now we know to be completely untrue, something Colin Powell indicated he wasn't completely comfortable in making the case for, even though he was being pushed to do it. That was huge at the time, was it not? It's impossible to go back and say what would have been if that connection hadn't been made, but at the time, that was a really big deal in getting support for going into Iraq.
Well, they had to spend, remember, about a year and a bit to do the propaganda to link Saddam Hussein with 9/11 when there was no link, right? That required a lot of ideological work to do, to such an extent that after that year, the vast majority of the American population believed that somehow Iraq and Saddam Hussein was connected with 9/11. I think the vast majority of the American population still believes that. I think it's one of the really interesting things about how ideology works is that facts actually don't really make any difference anymore. Even though everyone has now, even George Bush said Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11.
Many times has been said, yeah.
But if you did the public opinion polls, that is still the predominant view. If you may remember when you were in my classes, I always used to quote Confucius, who said, who was once asked by someone, what would you do if you were ever in charge? What would you do if you ever to remain in power? And he said he would, quote, rectify the language. That is, if you can control the language, reality doesn't matter.
So there's the issue of the Iraq War, but then we saw it with the Patriot Act, warrantless wiretapping, CIA black sites, clearly against any international law, a lot of what was going on with extraordinary rendition. Just kind of because of the narrative that exists since 9/11, people don't react in the visceral way with the outrage that maybe they would if that wasn't the context, right? I mean,
9/11 I think was one context. We also have to remember that there was a context already before 9/11 which really ramped up after it, which is anti-Arab ideology and Islamophobia. And that was what 9/11 kind of coalesced, was fear of the Arab world, fear of anyone who was different. And that fear was used in such a way. I mean, the film that we did, Hijacking Catastrophe, was called 9/11 Fear and the Selling of American Empire. And so that cultivation of fear was absolutely central to it. And to sort of, you may remember actually in Hijacking, we quote, I think I always get them mixed up, I think it's Goering. He said, you make a population scared, you can do whatever you want to them.
Corporate media has struggled a little bit, I think, with how to handle this issue of torture. And recently, it was definitely Wolf Blitzer on CNN. There was a way that he referred to waterboarding and other, I think the term was so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. And it's unbelievable because if he were to say which some consider torture, or which many consider torture, or which by international law are considered torture, he would be accused, Wolf Blitzer would be accused of being part of that so-called liberal media.
Just by referring
to it, right? So it's almost like we can't even get, number one, what is the unbiased way to refer to those techniques? I don't actually know the answer, but there's this fear in the corporate media of even appearing to be somewhat open to the fact that maybe it is torture. I think they don't really know how to go with it or how to handle that.
Because the moment you mention the word torture, then it conjures forward all kinds of things. So you just can't mention it.
Right.
You have to call it something else. Mm-hmm. But I actually think they could use it now. I think especially, I think especially young people wouldn't bat an eyelid about it. I mean, they've grown up on in this atmosphere of fear. They've grown up with video games. They've grown up with movies that have this as kind of commonsensical stuff, and so. Torture. I mean, it's one of the things as you said, why aren't people outraged at this? Why aren't people outraged at what is being done in the name of American values and American security, which is the last thing that's going to make America secure, is doing these kinds of things.
Is it a hard argument to counter when neoconservatives will say, even though there are legitimate concerns about what has been done by the government since 9/11, we haven't had another attack like it, and therefore it must somehow be working? Even if at face value you can say, well, it may be that there wasn't a similar attack attempted since then. We don't know. Some say there have, some say there haven't. Is that a hard argument to counter when you're making a critique?
It depends what you mean by the attacks. There's been lots of attacks in Iraq. I mean, that became then the focus of anti-American activity. And that's where people all over the world then went. And if you think that there haven't been attacks on Americans, all over the world since 9/11, then you're living in another world.
Sure.
And within, to the extent that we haven't had an attack here, although there have been domestic attacks, there have been other attacks by right-wingers.
Which, interestingly enough, are completely absent from, for example, New York Congressman Peter King's hearings about American Muslims. No mention of the 20-plus executed right-wing terror attacks, which are always portrayed in the media as lone wolf, unconnected from any kind of political discourse in the country.
And I mean, the Norway attacks was, I think, the perfect example of that. All right, when they first happened, I mean, the New York Times immediately linked it. They said to some jihadist groups because some, vague person on the internet said it was connected to it. I mean, that was the headline on online, and they called it terrorism. And the moment they found out actually that no, it wasn't actually a Muslim group, it wasn't a radical Muslim group, it was actually a homegrown Norwegian, Norwegian right-winger, terrorism stopped being used, and it became, as you said, about this, this lone wolf.
He's crazy.
He's crazy, yeah.
Right.
And therefore, and so to the extent that terrorism now, it actually is a meaningless word. Terrorism only can be applied to Muslims and to Arabs, and any other kind of political violence is called something else.
Similar to saying that we are in a global war on terror has also, we've in a sense been desensitized to that. It's just a constant. It's what it always is. The United States is always in a global war against terror, is it not?
It is, and we have to remember that is good for certain interests within the United States. It's really good for the military-industrial complex. And I want to keep stressing that. This is, and it's not even, doesn't even require a conspiracy. This is an institutional, construction within the United States in terms of how the economy functions, in terms of how the military functions, that there are so many interests now in this that it has to keep going, and that it just needs excuses.